Okay, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is George Autobee. I am 75 years old, former chairman of the Pueblo Genealogical Society. I've grown up here in Pueblo, Colorado, but I've had a lot of experiences, and hopefully this conversation I'll be able to share with you.
Great. I have so many. I probably should have done an outline because I have a lot of things to cover. So let's start with your ancestor, Charles Autobee.
Okay.
So you were just telling me that there's 50 different variations of the Autobee name that pop up everywhere. He has an unknown number of children, but upwards of 15, 16?
15, 16, yeah.
And that is a name that pops up, particularly when you're looking at Southern Colorado records. They're everywhere.
Yep.
And so that all came from Charles Autobee. Who was he and how did he end up in this area, and how does he figure into all these different pieces of our history?
Yes. I was fortunate enough to meet Jeanette Lecomte, who had done her master's thesis on Charles Autobee. And the reason she did her thesis on him is because she found all the different spellings of his name. He worked for the American Fur Company, and everywhere he was at, they would interpret his name a little bit differently. Autobee, Ortivis, Ortivis. We have close to 50, stand corrected, 50 different spellings on his name. She said, this is the same guy. And based on that, she started putting the story together. She followed on the records of the fur company. Other records she was able to find out of when he came out of St. Louis, Missouri, as a French fur trapper trader with the American Fur Company. He came out and trapped and ended up at Fort Hall in Idaho. And because of his trapping experience and his linguistic capabilities, he ended up being an interpreter for many of the Indian tribes that were up there in Idaho doing trade. Fort Hall was not a military fort. It was a fur trader's fort. And out of Fort Hall is where they would do a lot of their trading. He then left Fort Hall. He was there 2 years, and then he left down to Taos, New Mexico. And in Taos is where he met Kit Carson, the Bent's brothers, Charles Bent and his brother. In Taos is where he met one of his wives, Serafina Avila. She was Mexicana. And out of Taos is where he ended up also working with Saran St. Vrain. What ended up happening is the Bents at that time were putting up Bent's Fort, and we have reason to believe that he worked putting together Bent's Fort.
So this is the first Bent's Fort?
First Bent's Fort, the big one. Before that, he had worked at another fort down in New Mexico, Fort Barclay, and they were planning to sell it to the military, but the military decided to put up their own fort, and it was called Fort Union. And so he ended up building Fort Barclay, but they ended up destroying it after a while. The military didn't want it. So what ended up happening is he ended up in Taos working with the Bents, came out here to Bent's Fort. He would also work with Turley out of Taos, where they had called Taos Lightning whiskey. Turley's mill produced the whiskey. And Charles Autobees and his younger brother, Tom Tobin, would deliver the whiskey to Fort Union, to Fort Garland, to Fort up in Lafayette, up in northern Colorado, and to Bent's Fort. And so they ended up, they called our family whiskey runners and gun runners, because what had happened is that not only did they deliver to the forts, they ended up going back to St. Louis for the Bents to bring in the newest rifles, bringing in the newest pistols, bringing in the newest gear that they had back east. So they were the first ones to get a hold of the new rifles that were coming back, the percussion versus the old flintlock rifles, which played a role in Tom Tobin's life later on, a big role. But the family ended up going back and forth. At least we know 8 times Charles Autobees went back and forth between St. Louis, Missouri, and Taos, New Mexico, delivering goods and services. He ended up also, Autobees was scout with the military. He ended up being involved with St. Vrain when the Taos Rebellion took place. I think it was 1849. They killed Governor Bent, and Charles Autobees and Tom Tobin ended up being scouts. They helped bring in the military to help subdue the rebellion that took place in Taos. And then Autobees also served in the military with Buffalo Bill, with Wild Bill Hickok, and Kit Carson. And in one scenario, Charles Autobees and his son got in a fight with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill. And Buffalo Bill ended up getting demoted, and they kicked Wild Bill Hickok out of the military. He ended up going to Oklahoma and then to Deadwood. That's where he got killed. But to have that history of Charles Autobees interacting with them, and in addition to that, Charles Autobees was out at in Avondale. That's where his settlement was located at. And they were having a lot of problems were happening with the Native American community. And what happened is that they developed the 100-Day Warriors to come to settle some of the Indian uprisings that were taking place. What ended up happening is Shivington came down with about 200, 300 troops. They had Autobee act as a scout to go out to Sand Creek. At Sand Creek, that's when the Americans attacked the Native Americans who thought they were peaceful. You know, they had gone there because that's where they were told to be, and they were attacked. Well, Autobees, being that he had married into the Indian Native American community, refused to fight. In fact, he withheld his whole troop back. They had I think it was Company M, if I'm not mistaken, out of Avondale. No, H. It was Company H, and they refused to fight, the whole company, because many of his people in his unit were also married to Native Americans. So they refused to fight at Sand Creek, and now, in fact, they saved a couple of people out of the Sand Creek massacre. So to me, that was the most outstanding reflection of this individual and his humanity in reference to refusing. Even though he had been in battles, many battles, he's seen that one was wrong, and he refused to fight. And he ended up with the land grant from St. Vrain of close to 10,000 acres. And then when the Mexican-American War took place, the American government confiscated all of it and put Fort Reynolds on there and then on his land. And he couldn't afford to pay the taxes on the land that he had left. It was only left 640 acres out of 10,000. And so he ended up losing all the land and because he couldn't pay the taxes. So we lost the land grant.
And from what I understand in that history of Salt Creek, they mentioned that the reason that he went up there and settled at Avondale, or what's now Avondale, is that they were looking to protect the interests because they knew that was the border, right?
Yep.
The Arkansas River.
Yeah, Arkansas River.
And they knew that the Americans were keeping an eye on that area and were wanting to grab more land. And so they purposely sent him up there, I think because St. Vrain sent him up there as one of his buddies.
Yeah.
To actually settle up there right at the border to kind of keep an eye on things. Is that right?
Yeah, they sent him up there because it was still Mexican property. It was still part of Mexico, and it was a Mexican land grant. It was called the Vigil St. Vrain land grant. And they sent him up there like they do most settlements, is to protect the area, to get the settlement, to get the farms going, and get the families in there.
Did he take others with him?
Oh, yeah. He went up with about, what did he say? It was 48 people that went up with him, and he went up with 10 wagons.
And were those like Hispano families?
Yeah,
or?
they were all from Taos. They were all from Taos. They all came from Taos. In fact, our family was the one that built Fort Garland. He was the prime contractor for the fort
itself.
If you get a chance, you might want to check that place out. It's something else. But
and what year did they go up there?
1860s, I think it was. There was Fort Massachusetts. That was halfway up the mountain, Blanca. And the snow got too heavy. They couldn't get in there during the winter. So they moved it down to Fort Garland, and that's where he helped build it. And if you go into Fort Garland, there's in the commander's post, Kit Carson's office. As you go in, you go to the left, there's Kit Carson's desk and his office. If you go to the right, it's Kit Carson's rifle, and then further down is Charles Autobee's portrait, and it showed the Autobees that they used to make the fort, and it has some of the Autobees there and shows the process that they used for making the Autobees. So he was the prime contractor for it, and working at Fort Barclay, he worked at Bent's Fort, and then helped build Fort Garland. Our family was instrumental in helping develop the land, yeah.
So he had that property that's east of Pueblo.
Yes.
On the river.
Yes.
For how long? How many years was he out there?
He was out there. We got there in 1853, and it was the Civil War took place. The Mexican-American War took place, and then it was right after that. He was there. 1853 is when they got there. So, and they stayed there. Yeah. So how long would you say that would be? Maybe 1953, 2053, yeah.
Oh, that long. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
1853, we were the first Mexican family to settle out here. First family to settle. There were many families that had come out here but did not stay. But our family stayed, and that's why we got part of the land grant and still here. Yeah.
Well, and that's interesting that he was at Sand Creek, because I have a couple of Autobees connections, one of which is that I can't locate my wily ancestor, Pablo Alires.
Uh-huh.
He disappeared for a period of time after the Civil War. He did serve at Valverde in New Mexico.
Yes.
Then he went up. What I believe is that he followed the Colorado Volunteers back to Colorado after that engagement. And then he abandoned his family, changed his name.
Good him, yeah.
And so he disappears for about 10 years in the 1870s. I can't find him.
Mm-hmm.
But in his, and then he started a new family,
yep.
Which is the line I'm descended
mm-hmm.
from. But when I found his pension records at the National Archives for his Civil War service, he says that he was injured and disabled by being run over by a wagon 30 miles east of Pueblo in 1874, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so you did a presentation a couple of years ago on Zoom.
Yes.
On the location of the ranch, and you were talking about that, and I want to hear a little bit about that. But it like clicked for me, like, oh my gosh, that's where he was.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if he knew Charles or some of the other folks. He was in the Bloody Third.
Yeah.
At Sand Creek. He was not honorable.
Yeah,
I know of.
He went into the battle, yeah, or the massacre, yeah.
But perhaps he got to know some of those guys and ended up after the war, after they were all discharged, maybe he went up there to work or
could have, yeah.
Run freight. I mean, was there
Mm-hmm.
there was probably like some freighting.
Oh yeah.
Going on.
Yeah. Well, again, 30 miles east of Pueblo is Avondale,
mm-hmm.
and that's where the Autobee had a settlement, and that's where Fort Reynolds was located at too.
And what?
Fort Reynolds.
And was that active after the Civil War?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was active for a little while. It didn't last too long. It was an adobe fort, and right a few years after the Civil War, I think, is when they finally, because there was not that many hostilities anymore happening out here. But he was a scout at Fort Reynolds for at least 5 or 6 years, I know, because they had the 5th Cavalry there. They had the 7th Cavalry from Custer's unit. They were down there before, right after Custer got massacred. They served down here at Fort Reynolds for a little while. Then the 10th Buffalo soldiers were also here at Fort Reynolds for a while. Yeah, and at Fort Garland.
Were they at Sand Creek?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but they were at Fort Garland, and they were at at Fort Reynolds. Yeah, there's documentation on that.
So Charles still retained his ranch out there through the end of his life?
No, he lost it towards the last. He couldn't pay the taxes on it anymore,
Okay.
so they ended up auctioning it off, the highest bidder.
And is that why the family ended up in Salt Creek?
Some of them did. Some of them left. Some of them stayed there. Some of them stayed in Avondale, and they just didn't have no land anymore. They just stayed there and worked. But I know my great-grandfather, Mariano, ended up having to, they were farm field workers out in Greeley. And my dad was born in Windsor, Colorado, when they were working out in the fields. So then they came back here, and then they stayed down here in southern Colorado.
Well, that might be another connection, because my family that's connected to yours was connected to yours in Salt Creek, and they were in Windsor as well.
Oh yeah, who knows? Yeah,
for the season.
Yeah, that's what they would do, is go up there to work, and they come back down here. Yeah.
So when they were, again, in that history, it mentions the role of the Autobees in Salt Creek. And I did also read in there that in 1900, Salt Creek was a loosely termed neighborhood. It was sort of, from my understanding, a place where no one wanted to live.
Yeah, no. Even when I grew up, if you're some Salt Creek boy, you were hardcore. Plus, they were in the county. They didn't even bring them into the city. They were in the county, so they went to county instead of city schools. Yeah, like I said, Pueblo was the stepchild of Colorado, and Salt Creek is the stepchild of Pueblo. It's like, you don't want to go there unless you find a really beautiful girl. But other than that, it's and then even then, you go down there, you have to fight. I mean, because they didn't like strangers coming into their territory. If you weren't related, or if they didn't know you, it was fighting time, because they were not like now. They protect their neighborhoods.
Yeah, because it was between the mill and the slag.
Yeah,
piles?
Slag. Yeah. Well, the mill would dump all the slag at night. That was our 4th of July. We would see the slag coming down, all red. It would light up the sky and everything. They were just dumping it on the side. It would come down, and then you had the Salt Creek, going, and then Salt Creek Community was on the other side. So you had the Salt Creek Community, you had the creek, and then you had all the slag coming down from the steel mill that would drain into the damn Salt Creek River, and then go down to the Arkansas River and pollute it. And finally, they were able to stop, doing direct. When they went to electric instead of the coal, they stopped doing the slag dumping like that. I don't know what they're doing with it now, but that was our night, man. We'd go out there and popcorn and watch the whole place just light up when they would dump the slag over. And it was just red. And whoa, look at that, man. Light up the whole east side.
Oh, my gosh.
But it was those people in Salt Creek, man. They were right there. I mean, it's like, again, los pobrecitos, man. I felt so sorry for them. I dated a couple of girls from there when I was in college, and man, it was like, God, this is the hardcore barrio here, man. You had the girls would tell us, you got to be careful, man. When you come and see me, let's meet at the 7-Eleven. Yeah, they didn't want to have you driving over there because of dirt roads. It was all dirt roads then, too. And now they paved them. But, man, in those days, boy, it was, Salt Creek was the stepchild.
Yeah, so my great-grandmother, she was born down in Walsenburg. I was trying to I'm still trying to figure out. I think it had to have been before it was Walsenburg, but I'll figure that out tomorrow. And then they came up here and lived in Salt Creek, and then they actually were the first Hispano family, I believe, to be in Colorado Springs.
Could have, I mean,
and they're the first ones that are in the Sacramento records.
Really?
Yeah, with awesome. Spanish last names.
Yeah, especially Colorado Springs. Springs didn't exist. There was nothing there. It was just, and then all of a sudden.
And they were on the very similar location, actually. I think it had to have been somewhere they did not want to live. No services, nothing. She actually never had running water,
plumbing,
in that house. And she died in 1973. So I was I was sitting along the river at Salt Creek last night and just picturing her lifespan, just living in Salt Creek in the 1890s, living in Walsenburg in the 1880s, and then to live all the way to 1973. I mean,
That's hardcore.
She was really, she was an intense lady.
Yeah.
She rolled her own cigarettes, and she always had a beer in her hand. And now we understand why.
Yeah, of course.
Well, so our other connection is my Romeros. They disappear in Salt Creek. I can't find them before Salt Creek.
Yeah.
But my only lead is with the Autobees, who were in the those records. They're referred to as the Ortivis.
Ortivis, yeah.
And so Tomas, who's your great grandfather.
Yeah, it would be my grandfather's grandfather.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he and his wife were like testigos and padrinos for my family's
weddings and funerals and everything. Yeah.
So, and then they go back to all the way to like Arroyo Hondo, a couple generations back. So that's a lead I'm going to track to try to figure out if I can find them back in like Arroyo Hondo or Castillo or whatever.
But you've been to Fort Garland then?
I have. I'm going to go back tomorrow.
You have to go back, and there's a special library they have back there. So they got special books there that they're not open to everybody. You have to ask special permission, and they'll let you in there, and you can start perusing them because they may have some records on there about him or any of the family. Yeah,
because I'm also trying to. You do a lot of wild speculation in genealogy. And how when Pablo Alires left his first family, changed his name, he I think was at the Autobees ranch in the 1870s. In 1879, he started having babies with my great-great-grandmother.
Okay.
And so she was 14 and he was in his 40s or whatever. Typical.
Yep. Yeah, prearranged. They're all prearranged.
And so I always wonder how did they meet? And so she was, they came up from Arroyo Hondo. So I did wonder if he ended up at Fort Garland for various.
Yeah. Either as a worker or I don't know if military, if he was still in the military at the time.
I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be a good one to check out. The fort itself is something else. We used to visit when I was a little kid, but we had the picture of Charles Autobees up there, but it never correlated to me that he was the one that built the damn fort. And I'm going, he built the fort? And they said, yeah, he's the prime contractor. And I'm going, okay, how many people have their own fort? I mean, was even better. They had a cannon, a Gunnison, when he went to do some mapping here in Colorado. Had a cannon, and he left it at Fort Barclay. The guy Barclay said, hey, I can't pay you, but I'll give you this cannon. So Charles Autobees took the cannon in lieu of pay, had it up here at his place. When the Battle of Glorieta, the Confederates were coming up north, they visited Otterby, and they got the cannon from him, and they used it down in the battle, down in Glorieta Pass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So how many families have their own cannon? Have your own fort? Yeah.
And so what is left of the Autobees Ranch now?
What's left of it? It's all field now. They were using it for grazing. And what we found with the archaeological dig we were partially on, we found 2 feet wide, 10 feet long, all this material. The flood had come over the wall, grabbed the material in the house, and then drug it back, and then went out, okay? All this material was laying there, broken glass, different colors of glass, buttons, horseshoes, nails, and we figured out that the flood had come in and just pushed it up against the wall as it receded. So we found all this beautiful stuff here, and then again the owner said, well, he says, that's great, he says, but the past owner just passed, or the owner just passed away, and the property's in contention with the family, so they didn't want to do any type of archaeological dig other than that. But we found a bunch of stuff, man. I was real surprised. And it wasn't that far from the cemetery. If you go to I-50, you go to St. Vrain Cemetery. St. Vrain Cemetery is where most of the Autobees are buried.
Oh, okay.
You go in there, I mean, it's my grandparents are buried there, uncles, aunts, cousins. If you look straight south, you go about maybe another 100 yards, and that's where the settlement was at. And we could see where the wall was at and where all the stuff fell. And that's where we found those 2 holes with it. We went down and those 2 badgers dug those holes for us and found that, what do they call it, the base of the building, the foundation, cement, back in the 1800s. And it was buried under 2 feet of dirt before we even got to the cement. We should have hired those little badgers to work for us.
Yeah, they didn't need the paperwork.
They just went down there and they dug it out for us, man. And I'm going, whoa, cool. But
well, yeah. I have hope that will, just wait a little bit and then you'll be able to go out there and do that dig. That would be so cool. Metal detectors and. Yeah,
we were out there, but I had all the archaeological people from Pueblo. We were out there doing all kinds of stuff, and that's where I had to learn how to take classes. Okay, you have to go. It's like doing a criminal investigation.
Yeah.
When you go out there, man, you approach the site. You got to make sure you're not stepping on anything. You got to start sifting. Oh man, and you find stuff, and you got to mark it, and you got to die to time, take the pictures on. It's like a crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, wow, man, I like this. It was like getting dirty. I mean, you were in there looking for evidence to show. First time me and my cousin went out there, Abel Rail, we go out to archaeologists, and we get to this arroyo, and there was all kinds of water in it, and they didn't want to cross it, so we crossed it and went across. It had rained the night before, and you know how the rain hits the dust and the dirt, and it kind of wets it down, makes it just a little muddy. But if anything's out there that's shiny, shines, okay, because the water had washed the mud off of it. My cousin finds a button dated 1862 Army officer's button, military button. I said, man, that thing's worth $10,000. He says, what do you mean? I says, we show this to the archaeologists. We can get a $10,000 grant to do the archaeological dig. He said, okay, man. So we go over there, and you found what? I said, look at what we found. And I said, wow. To find a button dated in 1862 out in the middle of nowhere is like, oh, man, we found gold. And that's where we started doing all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's where I started taking classes and finding out all the stuff that we had done was wrong. You got to take class. If anyone's going to do any archaeological stuff, you got to take classes because you got to know how to do it right, or else you can destroy and neutralize the site if you don't know what you're doing. And so if people come in afterwards, they know what they're doing, and they say, well, I mean, you guys jacked up everything. I mean, that's no good. Yeah.
So when you were growing up, did you know all this history about your ancestor or about the ranch?
I tell you, my family ended up being strong Catholic, and because Charles Autobees had had 7 wives or 6 wives, they did not look upon him kindly. So I didn't get any information from the family. What had happened is that there was a book in the 8th grade, Colorado history, that talked about Kit Carson and Buffalo Bill, and it had Charles Autobees. And the teacher looks at me, and he says, "Are you related?" I look at him. I look at hell yeah, we're related. I didn't know nothing, but I'll take it. You know, look good to me. Kit Carson, Buffalo Bill, next to his name.
Got to help your grade.
Oh man, you tell me. All of a sudden, the door opened. It opened. I says, "Who in the heck is this guy?" And so I started asking. And like I said, a lot of the family wouldn't even talk about him. But then I found Lecomte's master's thesis, and the door just opened up. I mean, it was her research, what she had done, brought him back to life to me, and his story and what he did, and especially not only his military, because being former military, I have a real focus on that, but what he did when he came out after his service in reference to establishing a whole community. I mean, Avondale, well, half of the people in Avondale are related to me, okay? And Pueblo, I mean, it must have been at least, if your family was here in the 1860s, you're related to our family, yeah. The daughters, you had the men that had the Otterby name, but you had the daughters that ended up marrying Olguins, Finns, all these other families they married into, and he had about 7 daughters, I think. So those daughters are the ones that found out I'm related to everybody. But yeah.
So you have this book. The book is The Life and Times of Charles Autobees. And so this is Janet LeCompte's master's thesis, but then you pulled it together all in one.
Yeah, I did an edit, and in that edit I included the other books that were of Tom Tobin by James Perkins, John Durant in his book on the Taos Massacre, talks about Charles Autobees, and Warriors, Widows, and Orphans and Other Tales of the Southern Colorado by Beth Ferris Avery. She talks also about Charles Autobees and his wife and the fight that took place between Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill. But those other books didn't come out until about within the last 15 years. And so I was so lucky to find them and then find the stories, and then I just added them on to this one here. So not only fattened it up a little bit, but it gave different interpretations of what they thought the Cragen notes were talking about. And then
the Cragen notes being?
The Cragen notes were the ones that Cragen did the interview with Tom Autobee, the youngest son of Charles Autobees, before Tom passed away.
Who was the Padrino and on my
family
records.
On your family side, yeah. So in the Cragen notes, who knows?
Yeah, I'm so excited to read this.
You read them though, man, and for them to pull what they did, the stories off the Cragen notes, these people did an awesome job. I looked and I'd seen what they had done because I was able to trace it. But man, you had to go through each and every single sentence in the Cragen notes to find out, now I want to know what he's talking about. Cragen, he tried to do the good thing, but his style of writing was, he'd write, and it would just like miss and match, and he'd go from one subject to another. And so you had to read the whole thing in context to really see how they had pulled their stories together. But the Cragen notes are the base. And Jeanette LeCompte's mother was head of the Pioneer Library in Colorado Springs, and she was the one that had copy of the Cragen notes. And she said,
"Oh, that was the connection."
Okay. You do this. You put this together for me." And then she says, "Well, heck, I'll do my master's thesis on him."
I don't know, I just love this because this is sort of, this history is so rich,
very,
and so fascinating, and there's almost nothing written about it.
No.
And almost no one knows about it, which is why I wanted to do this podcast. But this is such a classic example. So nobody probably 20, 30 years ago really knew anything about. Now Charles is having his moment.
He got his moment. He's got his statue. Yeah, I got the book out. We're doing presentations. To me, I taught Chicano studies at the university here and up in Denver, at the CU Denver and at Metro. Come to Pueblo. I'm teaching Chicano studies, and I can't find anything local. So I said, well, let me put this together. And so in my classes, I was teaching, and I was using my book because I found out that several of the people in the classes were related to me. I said, whoa, okay. Yeah. So we had to have our story told in regards to what our participation was, because people don't know that we're the first ones to settle here, to fight. I mean, these guys were in so many battles. I'm 74. He was still fighting till he was 60. He ended up in a battle. There's a little creek called Chico Creek between here and Avondale, and he's taken his family back by wagon to Avondale, and at Chico Creek he gets attacked by Comanches, and they almost get killed, all of them. He got wounded. And the Comanches wanted his wife and his part of his family because they were Cheyenne and Ute, and Comanches and them they were fighting each other too. So the battle took all day long. Excuse me. Okay, I'm just imagining this. Here I am, 74 years old, and I got to go to battle. I got to go fight. Hey, this guy is still fighting at 60 years of age, man. And I'm going, man, he must have had post-traumatic stress really bad. Because I tell you, I at my age now, that's the last thing you want to go do is fight. But in those days, you had no choice. Yeah, you had no choice.
Yeah, and to have these kind of lives and then for people to just forget about it is just...
that to
so
me,
sad.
that's the sad part.
That's why bringing these people back to life, shining a light on their lives, their accomplishments, the things that they survived, and then also just how remarkable it is that like you're here today.
Yeah, very lucky.
To serve your country and to all the things that you've been able to accomplish. Because
well, this is the one that blows everybody away. There's a George M. Autobee who was killed on Normandy beaches, Second World War, D-Day. Okay? They leave France in the 1600s, come to Canada to fight the Iroquois Nation. They come down to St. Louis, Missouri. They end up in Fort Hall, then down to Taos. Then they end up here in Pueblo. And then one of the sons ends up going all the way back to France to die to liberate the homeland.
Wow.
That is the mind blower. And his military headstone is here at Roselawn Cemetery.
Oh, cool.
Well, he had left Pueblo, went to San Antonio, got married. From there, he went overseas and got killed. We didn't know about him. Nobody knew anything about him. Okay? And one day I get a phone call, and it's his son. He says, hi, my name is George Autobee. I said, well, my name's George Autobee. He goes, yeah. He says, my dad was killed Second World War in invasion of Normandy. I says, what? He says, let's talk. And so that's where I got the whole story. I mean, it was like, and he says, yeah, he's buried in Pueblo. He says, can you get a copy of the headstone? So I sent him a copy of the headstone. They have never been here.
Oh,
that part of the family have never been here, and in Colorado. So I told him, I said, we're having the ceremony for the statue, but he was so sick, he couldn't make it.
Oh.
But to have a person a family leave northern France, come to the United States, go through all the realities of history and what we did, and then to have one of the great grandsons return to go die to liberate it, France. That to me is the story. Okay, that's the circle. I need to say that the circle is completed. Even though we, this is George. Then this is the biggest thing I fell into when I was younger. This is Otterby. That's not a Mexican name. I said, no, man, it's a French name. Oh, you think you're French, huh?
So were they like one of the French families that were established like in the St. Louis area or along the Mississippi River?
St. Louis, Missouri, yeah. They came from, in fact, in Montreal, Canada, they were one of the first ones to settle in Montreal. The house is still there that they built in Montreal, Canada. And then the family broke up, and some of them came to the United States. Well, that was still under French influence. It was under the Louisiana Purchase, St. Louis was. So the French had dominance there. And then that's where they came from there to Colorado after he did his fur trapping activities. That's what brought him out here.
Yeah, I just always had a fuzzy idea of how all that worked, and then I got it as a gift. I got a book about the Bents.
Oh, yes.
It was a children's book that was from like the 1940s or something.
Yeah, a real old one, yeah.
And I was sure it was during, like the cowboy.
Yeah, cowboy days, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like a children's book. So it was from the little boys' perspective, like the Bent brothers as little boys being in St. Louis and being on the river and seeing like Manuel, Lisa's outfit coming in and all the adventure and these guys that got to, go on this long journey, and how cool that must have been for like a kid living in a city or whatever. And that sort of brought that whole thing to life for me about how these guys ended up coming down on the Santa Fe Trail. And
they St. Louis, Missouri was the prime for everything going west, and their family was out of St. Louis, and I tried to get back there because I wanted to familiarize myself with the area, but I never had a chance to. But imagine going back and forth 10 times at least.
I cannot imagine.
By wagon and horse from Taos, New Mexico, all the way to St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah.
Man.
So this is a weird serendipitous moment, I guess. I got stranded in Kansas City a month or two ago. I missed my Greyhound bus, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And the nenext one was until 10:45 that night. So I was like, I guess I'm spending today in Kansas City.
Yeah.
So the only thing I said is, the only thing I would really ever want to do is go to Westport, because Westport was the jumping off point for the Santa Fe Trail.
Yep.
It was where the Missouri River was curved north. So that's where they would disembark from if they came from St. Louis or Points East. But I would have to take a lift or something, and it was going to be kind of expensive, and I was already having to pay all this extra money. Anyways, so I've just got my backpack. So I just am like, well, I don't want to get into all that. I'm just going to sit and read by the river. So I sat and read by the river all day, and then started to walk back, and there was an interpretive sign, and it turns out that where I had been sitting all day was Westport. It was the point at the river that they would disembark. Westport is 4 miles inland, but that was like the town of Westport,
versus where they
where
did all the shipping
Bent's had their house and all that kind of stuff. But they would actually come off the river at that point where I had been sitting all day, and then they would go in their wagons 4 miles to Westport, and then they would go from there on the trail.
Yeah.
But
there you were.
There I was all day.
The whole time.
That's the whole time. But it was just unbelievable to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where they all, then they were just on the road in a wagon for all that.
And their whole life was going to
change.
And
back and forth. You think about some of those kids of Hispano families went to college in St. Louis or to Notre Dame or whatever.
They would send them there,
I cannot even imagine.
To get them educated, after they wanted them to have the best, so they would send them back east.
Wild.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I feel like I had one more question.
My question would be, what are we trying to do with all this information, and how are we trying to get it out to everybody and so they can appreciate it? And that's why this new technologies, using the media, Oh,
I was going to ask about your next projects.
Yes.
In terms of
documenting
your TV programs and the videos you want to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, for 5 years I had a program on Telemundo, and it was an English program on Spanish TV. And the two programs I had was the weekly issue. We talked about issues in our Hispanic community, what was happening. The other one was the Hispanic Chamber Review. And I was able to get out for 5 years the information on our community as well as our business community, sharing with people what was going on. I did 2 documentaries. One was on genealogical research in the Hispanic community, and the other one was on Latino veterans, Medal of Honor recipients. And then the one I told you about, the music video I did with Linda, I started doing some other work here just recently, political work and doing television programming, television commercials. And I got the bug to say, hey, look at video is the way to go. I've written my books. How do we get the information to the next level? In my life, I've seen that very few people are reading anymore. So how do we put it in a format that people can understand? Easy, accessible video. So I talked to the university president, the new one that's at the university now, Armando Valdez. Armando is from the San Luis Valley, by the way. Valdez is one of the oldest names. And Armando, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to do community TV. I said, I need programs. I'm going to do social justice, history, what's going on environmentally, what's going on in our community with the judicial systems, women's health. I says, is there a possibility that I can use your facilities here? And he says, George, you go talk to these people from the video section. He says, come back to me in a month and tell me what happens. So I'm in the middle process right now of meeting with their audiovisual people. I'm going to be looking to do programming. And one of the programs I want to do is on Charles Autobees, the history of the family. I have a PowerPoint already. It's done. All I need is a narrator and some background music. And I just go through it, make the presentation, and then have it there to where people can see not only the story we're talking about, but I put a lot of graphics in there So when I talk about him being in the military, I'll show pictures of military soldiers, like cavalry. Mm-hmm. If I'm showing Sand Creek Massacre, I'll show a scene of a massacre site. If I'm talking about Fort Hall, I'll have a picture of Fort Hall there. So it's something, as soon as I talk about it, you see it. And the house that they have in Montreal, Canada, I have the house there also.
Oh, cool.
So I bring them through all the way, telling them the whole story, all the way to the Sand Creek Massacre, to walk them through so they could see what this individual did, not only in his role in refusing to fight at Sand Creek, but that he fought in other battles and proved himself to be honorable. And when he seen something was not honorable, he refused to participate. And that's, to me, the saving grace of this individual, is that he knew, no, this is not right, what's going on here, and he refused to participate. And telling that story to me, and then again, where you had one of his great-great-great-grandchildren go back to France, to Normandy, to die on the beaches of the Second World War to liberate France. That, to me, shows that this family, our family, has paid in blood for our reality at being Americans, and that we have been there to support the reality of our democracy. I mean, our family has put themselves on the line. I was sixth generation. My grandson is seventh generation to be in the military. Okay, so him starting the whole thing, and then we start breaking it down. You know, First World War, Second World War, Korea, Vietnam. We've all had, the Autobees have been in all those wars. Wow. And then, like I said, Second World War, George M. Autobee was killed in the invasion of Normandy and D-Day.
And can you talk about the phone call you received from Oklahoma, too?
Yes. I get a phone call. John Otterby is the son of Picking Bones and Charles Autobees. John Otterby.
That was one of Charles's wives.
Yes, that was one of Charles Otterby's wives, his Southern Cheyenne wife. And John and his mother survived Sand Creek, went to Oklahoma, and kind of lost touch with them. What ended up is John ended up being a scout for the military, a treaty negotiator, and a chief of one of the tribes there in Oklahoma. And we seen his headstone, his military headstone, and talked about him being in the military, in cavalry. John was something else. In fact, they sent me all the information on him. We have, like I said, a full standing of him with his feathers, his full headdress, and his horse. And to me, to see that side of our family, it was something else. And then to have the woman that called me, she says, "Mr. Autobee, you've written about Charles Autobee, his wife Picking Bones, and the son John Otterby?" I says, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "That's my great-grandfather." And I said, "What?" She says, "How you doing, cousin?" And that, to me, it changed my whole reality of who I am. Literally changed my reality of who I am. And I says, "Okay, let's get this Indigenous Studies class going." We wrote it up, and we got a class on Indigenous Studies now.
And that's the kind of history that we need right now.
Very much. Especially now. Oh yeah. It's
is that it? You know, it's complicated. It's not just one thing. It's not just good or bad. It's not just
this combination of all the realities and who we were, what we did, and what we continue to do in our lives.
And look at the strength. That comes from that.
Yeah, and having the community and our family come together for that one day that we had the statue. I mean, I had cousins I hadn't seen in years. "George, wow, we did it." I says, "Yeah, we did it, man. We finally got, although it looks kind of hokey, it's okay, man. We got the statue." That's where that mule is huge. I mean, it's like, okay, man, a mule and a cart. I like the Baca one better. It was beautiful. He's got his rifle, man. He's got his, it's like he's ready for action. He's going into battle, man. And I'm going, here's Autobee holding on to a damn mule. You take what you can get. I'm honored. I'm glad they did it. I'm so appreciative that what they've done, and I hope they continue. I mean, we need just not the three. We got more Latinos, Chicanos, Hispanics have done quite a lot in our community, and they should be respected for it.
Yeah.
In fact, we were talking about, remember Billy Gallegos, the one that got captured in Iraq? Oh, no, it was Iran when they invaded the embassy and they took those prisoners. Billy Gallegos from Pueblo was one of the prisoners taken. And they're saying, hey, why doesn't we have a statue for Billy? I mean, he's recognized worldwide for what he did, his service. He came back and became a police officer. So we're going to see if we can get something like that pulled together.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Well, thank you so much for your work in the community and for all the work that you've done over the years to highlight the culture and the pride and tell those stories. And thank you for sharing today. It was such a delight.
Oh, thank you. I'm so indebted to you to allow me to share with you this information, because if we don't do something, we lose it. We have to document it, put it on video, on tape, on paper. But that's our responsibility. If we don't do it, nobody else will. And that's why I have chosen to get into media, to get into writing, to use higher education to get our story told. And thank you so much for allowing me this time to share with everybody that we all have a story within us. We all have a book within us. Put it down on paper and tell our story, because as role models, we have a responsibility to share with other people what we've seen and what we experienced, and we need to share that so that the fire's hot, don't get burnt, and are you going to put your hand in the fire when you don't have to? We've already told you it's going to be hot. Don't burn yourself. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.